This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stock Box interview.
Joining us today is David Ovadia, the non-executive chairman of Golden Metal Resources. Thank you very much for joining us today, David. The first time we're speaking. How are you doing?
Fine, thanks. Good morning, Mark, and nice to meet you.
Well, nice to meet you too. I wonder if we can perhaps just start by getting a little bit of an introduction to yourself and your role and responsibilities at Golden Metal Resources.
Sure. Well, I'm a geologist by background. I did a degree in geology and physics at Liverpool a long time ago now, and then I did an MSc, a Master's in Applied Geophysics at Birmingham. And I spent a number of years doing science research in geophysics. And then in about 1991, I think it was, I moved into a senior leadership role at the British Geological Survey, BGS. And I became the director of BGS International in 1999, with responsibility for all of the survey's overseas activities, which are all commercially run, and the good part of the UK commercial sector in BGS. So we're talking there about running a £25 million a year consultancy company, which happened to be owned by the government, but otherwise it ran as a company. I set up a spin-out consultancy company in 2011, joined the boards of several junior explorers, both listed and unlisted, in the UK and overseas. In 2014, something like that, partly retired and was finally about to retire a couple of years ago, when I was invited to join the board of Golden Metals as it was being formed within Power Metal Resources. I had a look at it. I thought this is a very interesting company. It has a lot of things going for it. It grabbed my attention. I accepted the offer to become the non-executive chairman, and I'm having great fun fulfilling that role at the moment.
Excellent. Well, of course, you are non-executive, so that means you're not necessarily involved heavily on executive decisions, but I guess you will have some responsibilities or certainly perhaps personal objectives that you'd like to see the company achieve. And with your background there very much in geology and geophysics, what specifically excites you or interests you about the company, and where do you perhaps think, what's the opportunity that you see? Well,
I mean, first of all, I'm part of a fantastic board of directors. Oliver, who you've interviewed him, he runs the company. Like me, he's a geologist, so we do talk geology from time to time. And Oliver has day-to-day responsibility for whatever the company does. My co-non-executives include Mick Billings, who's in Adelaide. Mick's got tremendous experience, particularly in Nevada, working at the Pilot Mountain project, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. Mark Burnett, he's very well connected with the investment market in the City of London. He's also got military connections, which become relevant for reasons we'll talk about shortly as well. Scott Richardson-Brown is a non-executive on our board, and he's, as you know, chairman of Power Metals, so that connects us with Power Metals. And Scott's got a background in corporate finance and accountancy and so on. So it's a great board. It's a pleasure to be with them. We get on really well. We tend to blur the line a bit between executive and non-executive. We all weigh in whenever we can with our expertise. Why do I like the company? Well, I think it's a company in which we can build real shareholder value. And a lot of junior explorers, they tend to, the share price goes up when there's a good announcement and it goes down when there's a bad announcement. But I don't see a lot of value being built. The strategy we have in Golden Metals is we're building real value, and people that buy shares in the company, they become part of the owners of that value. And I hope many of them will be long-term holders. I mean, I'm not particularly looking for a large number of people to buy and sell shares, on a daily basis. I know that's not what the brokers and the market makers want to hear, but actually, I'm quite happy if people invest in gold and metals and they hold their shares and go with us over a longer period while we build value, because then they will be able to sell their shares later on for more than they pay for them, because the company is worth more than it was when they bought the shares. The other, it's if you like, that's part of my strategic approach to leading the board. I also, really want to make sure that this company develops a reputation for integrity, for transparency, for honesty. We will communicate. We are communicating with our shareholders. They own the company. I don't own the company. We'll tell them what's going on. We'll tell them when things go well. We'll tell them when things don't go well, because in geology, a good geologist gets it right most of the time, but it doesn't get it right every time. And there will be times when we drill a borehole in the wrong place and the results aren't good, and we'll tell the market that. We're not going to hide things away. I hope that most of the time we'll be able to tell them that things are going well, but that won't always be the case. So, long-term strategy is building value. The way we'll do that is we'll continue to focus on Nevada, USA for the time being. And we'll run the company in a clean and honest and transparent way in partnership with our shareholders.
Okay. Well, focusing on Nevada, as you say, of course, that's where Pilot Mountain is, which of course has the tungsten and recently, as announced in RNS and interviewed with Oliver, the lithium there as well. So I think a lot of the focus, well, it's your flagship project, isn't it? So of course, a lot of the focus and effort is going to be there. I understand that in your past, you actually worked on with the UK and the European Union's critical metals strategy. And of course, the United States has the same thing, the US critical minerals list. How do you feel that Pilot Mountain fits into that critical metals list for both the United States and potentially for the European Union? And how do you feel that whole critical metals angle, the battery defense, metal space, how do you feel that's how do you feel about that movement at the moment?
At the moment, I think the world is experiencing two forces, and I'm not sure that everybody is really caught up with how fundamental these things are. The first thing that's happening, excuse me, is the decarbonising agenda, zero carbon, the move to net carbon zero by 2030, and all of these things, which as we all know, are going to require huge amounts of so-called critical or strategic minerals, the lithium, nickel, graphite, and many others. This isn't new thinking, although it's only really become kind of in the public conscience in the last 2 or 3 years. I was involved in an EU process 10 years ago looking into this, and friends in the USGS were also thinking along the same lines. Both the US Geological Survey and the EU published their lists of critical minerals. It's a list of about 40 minerals, most of which most people haven't even heard of. Actually, the two lists are not even quite the same, but that's okay. There's a core commonality. And then more recently, the UK, in fact, my erstwhile organisation, the British Geological Survey, has come up with a UK list, which is again a little bit different to everybody else's, but that's fine. Very recently, in the last month or so, I think I was sent a copy of the list published by the Indian government, and just a couple of weeks ago, I had a document from the Norwegian government with their own list. So everybody's doing it, but in slightly different ways. Now, where does tungsten fit into this? Well, I'll come on to defence in a minute, but it's in the public domain that nuclear fusion, which a lot of people regard as the most important source of carbon-free power in the medium to long term, nuclear fusion requires tungsten to operate, and there are academic papers coming out all the time along those lines. Very large amounts of tungsten, actually, and we are talking to fellow scientists about this. It's very early days. I don't think anyone really knows the details here, but it is clear that if nuclear fusion is to develop, it will need tungsten, and probably a lot more tungsten than is currently known about. So that's quite important. We're keeping that one in our mind. Let me go on to the second point, the second big event of the current time, which is Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February of last year. That caused a lot of Western governments to suddenly wake up to the vulnerability of sourcing certain critical minerals used for defense and important industries, sourcing those on the global market from countries which may not always be our best friends. Mm-hmm. And in particular in the US, they suddenly became aware of the need to find as much of their defense materials domestically as is possible. And I guess the timing was just right for golden metals, because we have this large asset of tungsten in Nevada. What could be better for the US government? And we started talking to the US government at a very early stage about this, and as you can imagine, it's a conversation which we can cover in a minute if you like. While we're talking about golden metals, we mustn't forget the other assets in Nevada, which are not necessarily critical minerals, but they're valuable minerals, the gold and all these things. So so our strategy is to stick in this space, to understand it better, to use our connections, to stay in close touch with the governments who are going to drive this, as much as the markets will drive it. And meanwhile, to allow UK investors to have exposure to this, really important US activity. So, what's not to like? I mean, I think it's all part. It's a lot more than just looking for a mineral. It's being part of the global geopolitical developments that are affecting all of us.
Mm-hmm. Is there a genuine fear, would you say, amongst governments about how they're going to source these critical metals, not from China and Russia? Is there a genuine fear?
Yes, there is. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, I was having a conversation a few months ago with someone from the US Navy who is deeply concerned that quite a lot of the materials they depend on for weapons and for the manufacture of planes, naval planes, is currently sourced from countries which could potentially be an enemy country. I mean, nobody wants that, but if you're in the military, you've got to think of the worst case. And
yeah, indeed. Okay, well, that's interesting to hear that. It's kind of good and bad. It's good in the sense that it means that, in theory, demand for these metals should shoot up, and of course the space should have its time in the sun, but also there's also a bit of a problem because you can't turn these things on very quickly. But as I understand, the US government are getting behind a lot of these projects, particularly homegrown projects. I was at a Mines and Money conference not so long ago, and there were people there from the US government who were actually looking at projects like, as investors might look at companies for how advanced they are, looking to secure those critical metals. And of course, there's a lot of funding available, isn't there, at the moment? And I believe Gold and Metal Resources that we're making a bid. Can you shed any light on that?
Yes, sure. We clearly have a mutual desire with the US government to develop Pilot Mountain as quickly as possible.
Okay.
We want to do that for commercial reasons. They want to do it for strategic reasons. Now, in normal course of events, the development of something like Pilot Mountain takes a number of years to go from where we are now, which we know we've got a resource. We think that resource is probably bigger than has so far been proved, and we're looking at exploration in a wider area. We're looking at the geological models and things like this, but it all takes time. It takes money, and so the normal course of events, going from where we are now to actually having trucks shipping out materials and taking them to factories would take whatever it is, 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, that's the normal cycle. from exploration to production in this industry. The US government would like that to be a lot faster and a lot bigger. And we believe that it can be faster and it can be bigger, but it's going to cost more money if we do that. And so we're talking to the US government about, would they like to contribute financially to us going quicker and bigger? And that conversation is very much ongoing. It's a conversation that I was able to start through some of my former connections in the US Geological Survey. We used to work with them closely in Afghanistan and Mauritania and other countries, so I had the connections there. They've sort of opened doors and connected us to the right people in the US government, and there is an active conversation going on at the moment. We don't plan to kind of release, on a sort of daily basis, every little conversation, every little meeting we have. We'll release the big news to the market as and when we can. Some of the things that we're talking about may well finish up being classified, and then we'll have a bit of tension between what we can release to the market because we want to and we should, and what we can't release to the market because it's not classified and written all over it. And we'll obviously take legal advice on that when the time comes. But we are on a pathway which I hope will lead to US government co-funding for accelerating Pilot Mountain in a non-dilutative way. In other words, they're not going to buy shares in the company, and we haven't worked out the details here, but they're going to be able to co-fund some of the expenditure which will increase the value of the company, but it won't dilute the shares.
Indeed.
We don't have those details yet.
Okay, but the early signs in the conversations are positive, are they?
So far, we've been made very welcome. When we said we've got tungsten in Nevada, they said, please come in.
Okay. Well, that's very good to hear. Let's hope we can hear some news on that as and when, and I'm sure investors would be pleased to hear those words fast-tracked of a project. That's always nice. So thank you very much for your time today, David Ovadia, the non-executive chairman of Golden Metal Resources. I hope we can perhaps catch up again, either on a podcast, learn a bit more about your background, or indeed just catch up on significant developments over in the US. But for now, thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome. Nice talking to you, and I'm always happy to come and talk another time. So thanks, Mark. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter, and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programs at stockboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.